we seem to want to always kill our heroes. Those we called friends. The moment we see them succeeding, we want to take them down. Why is that reflex very much connected, or seem to be connected to Africans or people of African descent or African American, like where we don't support each other really the way we should be compared to Jewish people, etc., etc. What is your take on that before we jump into the fashion world and music world and more conversations?
I'd love to speak on that. Those are two topics
Go ahead.
That I'm very passionate about. I just hope not to be too long about it. The first point that you mentioned is something very important. I know nowadays there is a topic that I think has been becoming more popular, and it's quite controversial because it's often misunderstood, which is conversations about male rights. And the reason why I started becoming very interested in this is because I've always advocated for equal rights. But unfortunately, most of the conversations about equal rights and feminism, although they were supposed to be about equality, they were a little bit more skewed over the past 5 decades, more towards the needs and the gaps that were created and needed to be, I would say, addressed for women. But in the meantime, that also created a problem, which I think has created 2 problems actually. It's which has miseducated both men and women about themselves and each other. And the reason why I say this is because the world is being forced to digest a form of quote unquote feminism, which is not feminism, because feminism is about equality, social equality and equity of the genders. Right now, we have like Karen feminism, which is a bunch of people with political agendas, and unfortunately, a lot of them were melanin deficient, who took advantage and hijacked kind of the certain movements, and this happens in every social movement for their own agenda. And as we see now, getting to the part about men. There are, I think, great things that have happened as a result of a lot of feminist activism, including the fact that I'm very happy that now a lot of feminist activists and intellectuals are talking about the importance of actually including men in the conversation. Because what has been happening is that, unfortunately, this very extreme sect of people who call themselves people who are gender rights activists actually exclude boys and men across the board. This happens in education, both in social and formal education, and then it includes, has reflexes later on, such as what Lono was talking about, the prison industrial complex. And I was actually pleasantly surprised that for the first time, movements starting to happen because something happened to a man or to men. But sadly, if you guys take notice, and I'm not saying one is more important than the other, Black Lives Matter has always existed in some form or another, and as it exists, I think for almost a decade, if I'm not mistaken. When people started talking about George Floyd specifically and violence towards Black men, then there were very loud voices to bring the conversation back to violence against Black women. Because unfortunately, male bodies are not important. And this is not just Black men. This is across the board. In most societies, men are not important. Fathers are devalued. Mothers are considered important. Fathers are not considered important. But then when children have issues, both female children, male children, non-binary children, when they have problems, then they say, oh, it's because of the patriarchy. And I'm like, if you're saying that only mothers are important, legally, because in most legal disputes in most countries, even when the mother is wrong, the biological mother, I would say, she's right, fairly or not, they say, okay, that's a reflex of the patriarchy. Yes, if you're speaking about countries where there is very repressive law towards women, yes. In most Western and westernized countries, that is not the case. Because in certain aspects of life, that happens. Hey, in modeling, women make more money than men. So which is a
Wow,
fun fact. And
I didn't know that. That's
yes,
interesting.
there's more female consumers in the world. There's more women than men in the world. Therefore, it's fair that they make more money.
I get it.
True.
True.
So that's the thing. Like most you cannot be a chauvinist and be a male model because you have to be comfortable with the fact that your female colleague will be making more money than you because it's a statistical fact. It's based on the amount of money that is spent. It is not because you're doing a better job than she is or vice versa. It's because you're doing the same job and you're being fairly paid for what the brand has to offer you based on their marketing budget. you know.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
if the world population was 50-50 men and we were all spending the same amount of money, then that would happen. But it is although yes, it is an exception. It is one of the few industries where that happens, but it happens. But I will say with men in specifically, and I always like to say this to everyone who has children or nephews or little brothers, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, please be mindful that we have taught a lot of, I think, the wrong ways about how to deal with having a balanced society. Because I think that from an early age, boys need to learn about girls need to learn about boys, and people who are non-binary need to learn about every other gender expression. Because the big issue that I see, and I see this now with like a lot of Gen Z kids and even some younger millennials, is I see young men and young women who don't know how to have a conversation because it's always a confrontation. It's about who is right. It's about who did something wrong. And unfortunately, if you're a man right now, if you're a boy right now, you were born wrong because you're at fault for everything that's wrong. You're the violent one. You're the aggressive one. You're not allowed to have emotions. You're not allowed to talk about your emotions or show them.
True. True. Very much true.
And
It's a
you're
big
only
problem.
supposed to say
It is a
yes
big problem.
to what the opposite sex says, which I think is a miseducation. Because if we do want equality, we do have to treat each other as equals. We have to be able to learn from each other, which again, it goes back to early education, both at home and in the school environment. And now moving on, so just to not be too long about the
Yeah.
killing our heroes thing. Um, that is the killing our heroes situation is very much I would say a brainchild of I think two things, especially when we're talking about the African and African diaspora context. One aspect of it does indeed have a colonial, raison d'être.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's not forget that in order to keep non-white people, and this extends to other ethnicities as well, non-white people complacent, you had to keep them fighting each other. Is kind of like the house slave versus field slave situation, where you're still gonna be doing horrible work, you're still going to be treated as subhuman, but there's levels. It's like one version is you're doing it out in the scorching sun or inclement weather, and you're outdoors and it's back-breaking work, but you're out there in the wilderness. And the other one, it's still as bad, but you're given the impression that it's better because you're closer to your master. So I think that there's that part of, unfortunately, although most countries have been decolonized, but most minds have not been decolonized. In the 21st century, you have a lot of colonized minds still. And then the second part of it also has to do with current political trends. I like to avoid politics, but unfortunately, there's quite an interesting
Get
phenomenon.
at it, brother. Get at it. Get at it.
Yeah, no, there's quite an interesting phenomenon, and I find it quite fascinating about how there's a lot of political extremism now because most young people now are either very Marxist or very fascist. And there's no in between because if there were in between, we'd be able to have a conversation without it being a shouting match about who's right, who's wrong, who has the right views, who has the wrong views. Because right now there is no conversation. I don't really see people with opposing views having intelligent conversations. It's all
No.
about confrontation. It's all about
It's all
confrontation.
about
So there,
canceling one another.
Exactly. So the reason why people kill the heroes is because,
Constructive, very
unfortunately,
constructive.
if you mix these two elements, what you have is, for example, if I think that Armando or Lono, Bodi, Nunes, Badi, etc. are my heroes, there's always an outside voice that will use certain triggers
Yeah.
to kill their image in my eyes.
Yeah.
And for the most part, they use a lot of mechanisms which are very like Western colonial style triggers to do that. Or some that are kind of like, these political dog whistles that happen. Like, for example, I will speak from the Lusophone perspective. I find it very interesting that in most Lusophone African countries, and I say this from experience, there have been things that I myself have said about myself online, but then no one paid attention until a Portuguese newspaper written by either a white journalist or a black European journalist said that, or their version of it. And I'll give an example that I think this is the best opportunity to actually talk about this. I find it very interesting that I'm someone who is non-heterosexual, and I was never in the closet, and I've been very candid. And although I don't really share my private life, I have a
Mhm.
sense of humor, and I share that a lot on my social media. I've had social media for I think a decade or so. However, most people in the world, especially in the Lusophone world, think that I came out of the closet in 2018 because a Portuguese tabloid that needed clickbait uh, posted a meme that I posted on my Instagram stories saying that I had come out. I made like a statement. Whereas, you know, since 2010 or 12, I had been posting the exact same things. But unfortunately, most Angolan and Mozambican and Cape Verdean media took that as fact. They're like, oh yeah, this person like really made it happen. And I'm like, come on, people. I was like when I was in college, I was on national TV in my country doing some things that made it quite obvious what my orientations were, and we're talking like 2001 to 2005. So I find it interesting that even when I say something myself, it's not valid, but
Mhm.
because again, Massa said something, then it's true.
Yeah, that's very true what you're saying. That's very, very true. And let me give the floor to Nunas to rebound on that. Nunas, please give us your insights on some of the things that brother Coréon Dú just shared with us. And yeah, just talking about killing the hero and all that.
Yeah, I mean, we have this I don't know, it's a disease almost like that that we never keep our heroes as heroes for ourselves, but maybe we have a tendency to follow some sort of current, and also we are manipulated by media and so many other sources of information to kind of take us on a path that, I don't know, that's why probably we're talking about this. We kill our heroes. I don't think that we necessarily do that. We are somehow probably driven or manipulated to react in a certain way. That's why probably Coréon Dú also mentioned that most young people today are either Marxist or fascist. I mean, why that? Why are we doing that? So I probably think that it depends on the seed, how the seeds are planted, that make these branches or trees grow in us, and we don't even realize, and then therefore we are killing our heroes. As far as supporting brothers, it goes on the same wave. I feel that a lot of people that do great things. Some people alive, they just they're forgotten if they are not in fashion anymore, if they are not on the right channel, if they are not on the right magazine or the right stages to perform. We tend to not support them anymore. And it's very sad. It's very sad to see these things happening in Afro Black communities, you know, that we don't stand for our own values, and we are easily manipulated in this ways.
And then the funny thing is that the manipulation is surprisingly intoxicating even people that we would believe educated. And on that, brother Lono, so yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to say something because this isn't I'm speaking from, I think I'm the only American on this panel, right?
I'm an honorary one. I'm Angolan, but I grew up in the U.S. I was there since from childhood until college.
What city?
So Virginia,
New York.
Falls Church, Virginia.
Where's that?
DC area.
Yeah.
Well,
what I wanted to say was that two things on the subject of what I think is one of the reasons that men of color, African Americans here in America are so self-destructive is two elements. Once the abolition of slavery, which was to introduce capitalism, when the powers that be and the people behind the curtain, as I call them, decided that they wanted to introduce capitalism, the only way that was possible was to abolish slavery, and so that they could, world trade and work with countries who were, if they were against slavery, then fine, we don't promote slavery. But it actually enslaved African Americans, the abolishment of slavery. But also there was a gentleman by the name of Willie Lynch who lived somewhere near Virginia, I do believe. And he was formerly a slave owner. His family had history in slavery. And what he did was he drafted a document. And in this document, he took it all around the South and gave it to all the slave owners and former slave owners. And this document was called the Willie Lynch Letter. And what it did was it spelled out a way to keep African Americans keep African Americans down and to keep them fighting against one another. And what it talked about was if you pit the young against the old, the light against the dark, the tall against the short, anything where there was a difference, if you were, from this side of town or you were from that side of town, these were all reasons enough to pit people of color against one another in order to get them to stay suppressed. And I have to say personally, I believe that when I discovered this back in, I want to say this is probably the mid to late 70s when I first became aware of the Willie Lynch Letter. And I have to say that for me, it resonated because, and I see it still to this day. And it goes back to the point about my experience as a model, which is very short-lived. I've only had about a 5-year run before the pandemic, and who knows where it's going after. But this was also well before any of the Black Lives Matter movements and things like that. That's not what promoted, I think, my ability to work for the variety of clients that I was able to work with. But the point I'm making is that you guys can all look it up. I suggest everyone that's listening look up the Willie Lynch Letter and just read it. And it speaks directly to a lot of the reasons I strongly feel America was able to keep the people of color suppressed.
But isn't that interesting? Whereas this is also obviously being seen and resonating deeply with our, diaspora and African communities even back home on the continent. Badi, can you speak a little bit on that? Because I know you're very, very, very in tune with the topic as well, just like all of us. But you and I had some conversations on that in that regard. Can you echo maybe what Brother Lono has just shared here?
Yeah. But for me, there is three question. What's the definition of a black man first? What's the history of a black man? How to raise a black man? Because, you know, we're talking about ambiguity, you know? What's a black man? It's hetero, homosexual. What's the history? Is an African or Afro-American from the West Indies, from Africa, from the diaspora? You know, that's there is a lot of question, and the problem and the problem with all that question is I give you an example. I was born and raised in Brussels, so in Congo we are speaking a lot of language, but the most known is Lingala, and if you don't speak Lingala, some people are gonna say to you, "Oh, you're right because you don't speak Lingala." You know that's a problem. Oh, you don't eat fufu. Oh, you're right because you don't eat fufu. Oh, you know. In fact, that's all. That's all I grew up. You know, and I was like, oh, I have to speak Lingala. You know, because I'm a black man. I have to eat fufu because I'm a black man. You know, and it's the same. It's the same stuff with the history. You know, we go to school, and in school they are saying, oh, you know, Charles de Gaulle is the savior of Africa because okay, and I'm like, oh, Charles de Gaulle. Armando was talking about Mansa Musa, but
Mansa Musa.
Yeah, but they don't. We don't learn anything about Mansa Musa in the school. You have to read a book. There is I don't know how to say that. There is a word when they say if you want to hide something to a black man, put it in the book. and you know that's a real problem. And that problem leads us to killing our heroes. Because what's the heroes? The hero is the person that disturb the system. The hero is the person who's changing the narrative, you know. And that's the reason why we kill our heroes. Because sometimes it's about the power, sometimes it's about the cash, but in fact it's about the misunderstood, you know, because they kill Lumumba, they kill Sankara, they kill Gaddafi, they kill Malcolm X, they kill Martin Luther King. You know. In fact, in fact, that's the real problem. We don't know ourselves because when we kill our hero, we are killing ourselves. So for me, that's the real problem. Yeah.
Okay, well,
I would love to.
The floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Yeah.
You're here. It's yours, brother. It's yours.
Heating up. It's heating.
I think based on what Coréon Dú said and Lono, it's everything. I just want to extend to most of the things that you guys said, which is true. First off, for me, as I said, you know, I believe that I've always, you know, lived inspired life to be more conscious, you know, of myself, my history, and you know, I believe also time is what takes us to wherever we should, you know, should go to and around. And this is what the pandemic did. This consciousness, the awareness of knowing the lies that have been told to you, because that's the only problem. If you're talking about particularly about killing our heroes, it's the lies that have been infiltrating our minds, and we still so mentally colonized in a way to believe that, you know, and so many things. I'll give a perfect example here that I'm sure we all had this experience where you have an issue with someone that you don't even have any relationship with yet, just because somebody told you that, be careful with that guy, or don't mess with that guy. And that's the problem. We never take the time to really get to know each other on a personal level. My experience with Coréon Dú might not be the same experience with you, Boddhi. So if you're going to really take on whatever happened and really make up your mind already, you already killed him. He's dead in your mind. Yeah. Because you don't even give the chance to kind of get to know, okay,
see the ideas of one another is what's killing us.
This is the experience that I've had with this person. That's fundamental issue that we all have to be conscious and aware